We live in an age of haste. Everything around us seems to move at full speed. Flashing notifications, piling deadlines, expectations that feel almost unbearable. And within this whirlwind, there are parents who face an even deeper challenge: raising a child with autism or ADHD. It is not just a race against time, it is a marathon against the soul itself, one that demands patience when body and mind already feel exhausted. It is precisely in this setting that Stoic philosophy re-emerges with the strength of a rock in the storm. For the ancient Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, patience was never passive waiting, but an inner fortress. They did not see endurance as weakness, but as one of the highest forms of power. To be patient is not to give up, it is to stand firm when everything around us urges surrender. But how do we translate this ancient wisdom into the daily life of a family, navigating meltdowns, sleepless nights, tense school meetings, and judgmental stares in public? Philosophy is not a dusty book on a shelf, it is a silent sword, an invisible shield we can carry into every gesture, every response, every silence. Stoicism teaches us that we do not control the world, but we always control our response to it. In caring for a neurodivergent child, this becomes vital. We cannot control the pace of their speech, the intensity of their emotions, or how society reacts. But we can choose whether to react with despair or to respond with serenity. We can decide whether to be consumed by frustration or strengthened by patience. Here, Jung steps in as an ally, reminding us that we often project our shadows, our fears, frustrations, and unmet expectations onto those we love most. By recognizing these shadows, we stop seeing our children as problems to be fixed and begin to see them as unique beings, silent teachers who force us to grow. Buddhism, in turn, echoes the same truth. Compassion is not pity, but presence. To walk beside a child at their pace is a form of moving meditation. It is to accept that every cry, every silence, every burst of energy can be an invitation to practice patience. This guide is not a manual of quick fixes, for haste is the enemy of the soul. This is a call to inner transformation, an invitation to view patience not as a burden, but as a power, not as resignation, but as active resistance. Because in the end, the real question every parent must ask is not, how do I make my child change? But rather, who must I become to be the guide my child deserves? When we think of patience, we often imagine someone sitting idly, waiting passively, perhaps even resigned. But for the Stoics, patience was something very different. It was the fortress of the soul. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote that patience is the mightiest of weapons, for it endures without corruption. For him, to withstand without breaking was the ultimate proof of strength. This view stands in sharp contrast to our culture, which values quick answers, instant solutions, results now. For parents of autistic and ADHD children, this cultural clash is even greater. Outsiders often demand rapid changes in a child's behavior, as if their authentic ways of being could be forced into a standardized mold. The world's impatience becomes a constant pressure inside the home. But here, Stoicism offers a silent revolution. To be patient is not to do nothing, it is to do the hardest thing of all. It is to remain firm, whole, and present even when everything within us urges escape. Patience is active, not passive. It is the ability to sustain a fire within without letting the flames consume the world around us. Picture a father in the middle of his child's meltdown at the grocery store. The scream echoes down the aisles. Judgmental stares multiply. His heart races. The instinct is to react with anger or despair, but Stoic patience does not command us to swallow our emotions. It asks us to breathe deeply and remember, this moment is a test of my fortress. I cannot control others' judgment or the intensity of the crisis, but I can control the way I choose to stand here. That choice, repeated day after day, builds an invisible wall of resilience within the soul. Jungian psychology sheds further light on this process. For Jung, patience also means the ability to endure the discomfort of inner transformation. The unconscious often confronts us with images, frustrations, and limits we would rather avoid. In caring for a neurodivergent child, the shadow appears in thoughts like, "I can't take this anymore. Why me? My child will never." These are not moral failures, but voices of the shadow begging for recognition. To be patient is not to be dragged by them, nor to deny them, but to face them with awareness. From the Buddhist perspective, patience is a form of compassion. The Buddha taught that patience is the highest of ascetic practices, for it is easy to be calm when life is orderly. The true test is to remain balanced when life is chaos. For parents, this practice becomes a spiritual dojo. Every moment of tension is an opportunity to train the mind and expand the heart. Here lies the essence. Patience is strength because it keeps us from being swept away by chaos. It grants us the time to think, to choose, to act in alignment with our values, rather than simply react. And in caring for children with autism and ADHD, that difference between reacting and responding can change everything. A simple example, in the face of a burst of energy, reacting might mean yelling back, punishing in the heat of the moment, feeling defeated. Responding with patience might mean waiting for the storm to pass, holding firm presence, then later talking, guiding, teaching. A child learns not only from words, but from the living example of how an adult handles frustration. Seneca once said, "True greatness lies not in never being disturbed, but in never being overcome by disturbance." That is the essence of Stoic patience, not to deny difficulty, but to master it within. If we look closely, patience is the most revolutionary act in caring for a neurodivergent child. It defies a world that demands speed. It defies our shadow that whispers of surrender. It defies the very logic of immediacy. To be patient is to become a living fortress, silent, unshakable, and inspiring. One of the greatest gifts Stoicism left us comes from the simple yet transformative words of Epictetus. Some things are up to us, others are not. This distinction, known as the dichotomy of control, seems obvious at first, but it holds wisdom powerful enough to free parents from the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations. When raising a child with autism or ADHD, we often waste energy trying to control what is beyond our reach. Meltdowns that erupt without warning, the school's reactions, relatives' comments, even how the child expresses themselves to the world. The result? Frustration, guilt, exhaustion. Epictetus invites us to pause and ask, what here truly depends on me? This question is a key that opens the door to inner freedom. It depends on me to remain calm even when the storm hits. It depends on me to prepare the environment to reduce overwhelming stimuli. It depends on me to choose words that guide rather than wound. It depends on me to decide whether others' stares will dominate me or become nothing more than background noise. But it does not depend on me how quickly my child learns a skill. It does not depend on me how fast they process the world. It does not depend on me how others judge. It does not depend on me whether crises arise in the first place. This recognition is not surrender, but liberation. Because when we stop wasting energy on battles we can never win, we have the strength to fight the ones we can. It is as if we were carrying a backpack full of stones. By dropping the ones that are not ours to carry, we walk lighter and stronger. Jungian psychology adds an important layer. We often try to control the outside world because we fear looking inward. Jung would say that the urge for external control reflects an inner shadow, the fear of helplessness, the terror of rejection, the wound of not being enough. Recognizing this shadow is painful, but it is also freeing. For in accepting that we cannot control everything, we discover how much power we still hold within ourselves. In Buddhism, the same truth appears as radical acceptance, not acceptance as resignation, but as clarity. This is how it is now. Fighting reality only multiplies suffering. Acceptance, on the other hand, opens space for compassion, both for the child and for ourselves. A practical example: imagine a morning when the child refuses to get dressed for school. The parent insists, argues, despairs, and the result is stress, tears, and lateness. Now, Imagine the same scene illuminated by the dichotomy of control. The parent realizes they cannot control the refusal itself, but they can control their own reaction. They breathe, give a few minutes, perhaps offer a choice between two outfits to restore a sense of autonomy. The situation is still difficult, but the emotional weight is drastically reduced. Seneca reminds us, we do not suffer from what happens, but from what we believe should have happened. A powerful truth. Often our pain does not come from the event itself, but from the expectation we had built. We expected a calm morning, but we got a battlefield. We expected the school to understand, but we faced resistance. We expected relatives to support us, but we met criticism. Stoicism invites us to release these expectations and face what is real. Parents of autistic and ADHD children know there is no perfect script, but there is something more valuable, the chance to become serene guides, because they have learned to distinguish what they can change from what they must accept. To raise a child with autism or ADHD is not only to walk beside their growth, it is also to confront our own shadows. Carl Gustav Jung taught that every human being carries within a shadow the collection of desires, fears, frustrations, and expectations we prefer to hide. And it is in parenthood that this shadow often roars the loudest. Every parent, even unconsciously, carries an image of the ideal child. They expect certain behaviors, achievements, ways of socializing. They build a picture of the perfect son or daughter, one who fits social norms, who never causes trouble at school, who develops at the same pace as others. When reality fails to match that image, the shadow begins to whisper, "Why isn't my child like the others? Did I fail? Will they ever?" These thoughts are not signs of lack of love. On the contrary, they are born of love. But love entangled with fear, the danger lies in ignoring them. Because when unacknowledged, they are projected onto the child. The parent, without realizing it, begins to act as if the child were a problem to be solved, rather than a unique being to be guided. Stoicism helps us face this shadow. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, "It is not the world that disturbs me, but the judgments I make about it." Applied to parenting, we see that often it is not truly the child's behavior that wounds us, but the contrast between that behavior and the expectations we carry. In other words, it is not reality itself that hurts. It is the gap between reality and the ideal we created. Recognizing the shadow does not mean eliminating it, but bringing it into awareness. Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." Nice. To look inward in the context of parenting is to have the courage to admit, "I expected a different child. I feel fear. I feel frustration, but I choose to love and guide this real child, not the image I created." This act, far from weakening the bond, strengthens it between parent and child. From a Buddhist perspective, the shadow can be seen as attachment to a fixed idea of how life should be. When we release that attachment, true acceptance emerges. It does not mean giving up on the child, but giving up the illusion of total control. It is opening space for the child to flourish at their own pace, in their own colors. Take a concrete example. A mother who dreamed of seeing her son excel in team sports realizes that he struggles with coordination and does not feel comfortable in groups. If she does not acknowledge her shadow, she may push, insist, compare, creating even more suffering. But if she accepts her disappointed expectation, she creates space to discover other talents in her child, perhaps music, art, or technology. The child did not match the ideal, but revealed his own path, just as valuable. The Stoics would say that patience here is the virtue that turns shadow into light. To be patient with oneself is to accept that it is human to feel frustration. To be patient with the child is to give time and space for their uniqueness to unfold. And perhaps this is one of the greatest lessons neurodivergent children offer their parents. They force them to break the molds of conventionality and confront their own shadows. In the end, it is not only the children who grow, but the parents who, through this process, become more conscious, compassionate, and deeply human. If there is one word that describes the daily life of parents of autistic or ADHD children, that word is unpredictability. A day may begin calmly and end in crisis. A simple trip to school may turn into a battlefield. What seemed easy suddenly becomes monumental. It is within this unstable terrain that Stoicism reveals its practical power. After all, philosophy is not distant theory. It is training for the soul. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and Stoic philosopher, ruled in the midst of wars, plagues, and betrayals. Yet in his meditations, he wrote about staying calm, remembering that the obstacle is the way, and training the mind not to be dominated by what lies beyond control. If he could cultivate serenity amid imperial crises, we too can train to remain serene amid the storms of family life. But how can this be applied concretely in the daily life of a parent facing constant chaos? Here are some Stoic techniques adapted to family life. 1. Breathing as an anchor. The Stoics valued mastery over the body as part of mastery over the mind. In moments of crisis, before reacting impulsively, practice a conscious pause. Inhale deeply to a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale slowly to a count of 6. This simple practice slows the mind and restores presence. When chaos erupts, breathing is the safe harbor. 2. Silence as a response. Seneca said, "Silence is the loudest cry of wisdom." Not every provocation deserves an immediate reply. When a child screams, cries, or explodes, responding at the same intensity only fuels the storm. Patient silence, accompanied by firm presence, can be more instructive than 1,000 words. It communicates, "I am not dragged by chaos. I am the point of calm within it." 3. The discipline of the mind. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of difficulties. Parents can apply this by preparing mentally for possible crises. Before leaving the house, for example, imagine, if my child becomes overwhelmed, how will I choose to respond? By anticipating chaos, the mind is already strengthened to face it with serenity. 4. Focusing on the essential. Epictetus taught that we should not waste energy on what does not matter. In daily chaos, ask yourself, does this really need to be a battle right now? Often we insist on trivialities, what color shirt to wear, how toys are arranged, and create unnecessary wars. Choosing your battles is an act of wisdom. 5. The Stoic journal Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as a way of keeping his mind clear. Parents can adopt this habit. At the end of the day, briefly record what was difficult, how they reacted, and how they could respond more calmly in the future. This strengthens self-awareness and creates real progress over time. Jungian psychology reinforces this by reminding us that we must integrate emotions instead of denying them. Writing about feelings is a way of dialoguing with the shadow, acknowledging frustrations, fears, and guilt so they do not spill unconsciously onto the child. In Buddhism, we find the same practice in mindfulness. To be present means not being dragged by future projections. What if they never learn? Or past resentments? Why can't they do what others can? It is to act in the moment with what is right in front of us, without adding unnecessary weight. A practical example: imagine a meltdown in the car during traffic. The impulse is to lose patience, shout, feel trapped. But by applying Stoic techniques, the parent breathes deeply, focuses on the essential, keeping everyone safe, and chooses not to turn the moment into a battlefield. Silence, calm, and firm presence speak louder than irritation. Chaos will never fully disappear, but as Marcus Aurelius taught, fire tests gold, and adversity tests the soul. Chaos is the training ground. The child is not the problem, but the teacher who shows us how to strengthen the fortress within. On the journey of parenthood, especially when it comes to autism and ADHD, parents are not merely caregivers. They are, in many ways, spiritual guides. Jung reminds us that every human being carries universal archetypes within, ancestral images that shape the way we live and act. Among them is the archetype of the wise guide, one who does not control, but leads, who does not impose, but illuminates the path. This archetype appears in myth and literature: Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, Yoda in Star Wars, Socrates in Athens, or even a silent grandfather who imparts wisdom simply by example. The wise guide is the one who remains firm in the face of hardship, who shows paths without forcing others to follow them, who transmits serenity amid the storm. When we think of parents of neurodivergent children, this archetype becomes vital, for the natural temptation is to assume the role of controller, to push, to correct, to fit the child into the world. But the real task is different, not to mold the child to our expectations, but to become guides who walk beside them at their own pace. The Stoics reinforce this. Marcus Aurelius, though an emperor, saw himself as a constant learner of life. He did not seek to control everything, though he held absolute power, but saw himself as a servant of the greater good. For parents, the parallel is clear. You hold authority, yes, but true strength lies in guiding with calm firmness, not in dominating through force. Epictetus said that the true teacher is not the one who speaks much, but the one who teaches by example. At home, the child observes how parents react to frustrations, handle delays, respond to social judgment. Each reaction is a silent lesson. Parents are the first philosophers a child encounters, and often the only reference for how to face the world. A practical example: when an autistic child has a public meltdown, the father may take on the controller stance, scolding, forcing silence, feeling ashamed. But if he activates the wise guide archetype, his posture shifts. He kneels, looks into his child's eyes, stays calm even under judgmental stares, and transmits security. The crisis does not vanish instantly, but the child feels they are not alone, that they have a steady guide at their side. This is the transformative power of the archetype. It changes the energy of the environment. The external chaos continues, but the wise presence creates a field of stability. Marcus Aurelius said, "Whatever your guiding principle commands, do it without hesitation." To be a guide to a neurodivergent child is to listen to that inner guide, one that speaks more of patient love than rigid authority. One of the greatest dilemmas parents face is how to balance firmness and compassion. If there is only discipline, the home becomes a barracks. If there is only misunderstood compassion, the home becomes a space without boundaries, where the child finds no safety. The real challenge is to unite these two forces, discipline and compassion, into a balance that shapes character while transmitting love. The Stoics reflected deeply on this. For them, discipline was not punishment, but inner order. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul is dyed by the color of its daily thoughts." In other words, small, repeated practices shape life. Discipline is that constancy, teaching the child that there are rhythms, responsibilities, and consequences. But the Stoics were also profoundly humane. Epictetus, who was born enslaved, knew what it meant to suffer under imposition. His philosophy was never about dominating others, but about mastering oneself. In parenting, this means discipline is not a weapon to control the child, but a structure that allows them to flourish. An example, setting regular sleep schedules. It is not about ordering the child to sleep, but about creating a predictable environment that offers safety to the child's mind. Discipline is, in truth, a form of love, because it provides structure and predictability in a world already confusing by nature. But alongside discipline must be compassion, not sentimental compassion that excuses everything, but the active compassion taught by Buddhism, looking at the child and saying, through silent actions, "I see your struggle, I recognize your pain, I walk by your side." Compassion is the willingness to enter the child's world, rather than forcing the child to fit into the world of adults. Jungian psychology also sheds light here. Jung spoke of the importance of integrating opposites, of avoiding extremes. Discipline without compassion is shadow disguised as authority. Compassion without discipline is shadow disguised as love. True growth occurs when these opposites are reconciled within us. In practice, this means when a child is in crisis, compassion comes first. Welcome them, breathe with them, wait for the storm to pass. After the crisis, discipline, show that there are consequences, teach calmly, set clear boundaries. This balance is an art. It demands patience, self-mastery, and daily practice. It's easy to slip to one side, either becoming too hard or giving in too much. But every slip can be a lesson, as long as you use it for reflection. A concrete example: a child with ADHD repeatedly forgets homework. The path of extreme discipline would be to punish harshly, leaving no room for understanding. The path of misguided compassion would be to let it slide, always excusing it. Poor thing, they just can't do it. The middle path is to acknowledge the different neurology while also creating concrete strategies, set a routine, create visual reminders, and actively support the process. Here, discipline and compassion become allies, not enemies. Marcus Aurelius wrote that patience is the fortress of the soul. That line also applies to the balance between compassion and discipline. Patience is the thread that stitches the two together. Only with patience can we uphold discipline without becoming harsh, and practice compassion without drifting into permissiveness. Buddhism adds a valuable reminder. True compassion also includes the wisdom to say no. Love is not letting a child do anything they want. It's helping them discover that limits are part of life. A no, spoken with firmness and tenderness, is one of the purest forms of compassion, because it protects the child from consequences they do not yet understand. At bottom, parents are sculptors of a soul in formation, but they do not sculpt with hammer and chisel. They sculpt with presence, example, and consistency. The balance between discipline and compassion is the art of shaping without breaking, correcting without wounding, guiding without suffocating. There is a hard but liberating truth. Our children rarely remember everything we say, but they never forget how we made them feel. Words may fade with time, but the energy with which we respond, the calm or fury we transmit, imprints itself forever on emotional memory. This is where patience reveals itself as the quietest and most powerful of teachers. It's not only about enduring present difficulties, but about building a legacy that will shape how our children learn to face the world. The Stoics knew that life is taught not just by speeches, but by example. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That is the key. Patience doesn't need to be proclaimed out loud. It needs to be lived. A child watches, absorbs, imitates. When they see a father take a deep breath instead of yelling, they learn there is another way to handle frustration. When they see a mother remain serene even under public judgment, they learn that dignity does not depend on others' approval. Marcus Aurelius, even as an emperor, wrote reminders to himself about patience and humanity. He knew his legacy wouldn't be only his military victories, but the way he governed with calm in times of chaos. Parents, too, are emperors of their small family kingdoms. Your patience, or lack of it, will be the mark you leave on your child's soul. Jungian psychology illuminates this with the concept of individuation. Every person, including our children, is in a process of becoming who they truly are. That path requires space, time, and respect. Patience is the fertile soil where individuation can unfold. Parents who rush to correct, mold, and adjust constantly without patience stifle that process. Those who, even in difficulty, offer calm presence allow the child to discover themselves safely. Buddhism reinforces this with the notion of silent transmission. Many masters did not teach with long speeches, but with their very presence. A master seated in silence, steady and attentive, taught more about serenity than 1,000 words. In the same way, when a parent stays calm during a crisis, they are teaching more about balance than any lecture could convey. A practical example: imagine a child with ADHD who takes half an hour to get dressed in the morning. The impatient father yells, pressures, threatens. The child gets dressed, yes, but associates the act with stress and fear. Now picture the same scene with active patience. The father sits, helps with small steps, turns the rush into a game, maintains firmness without aggression. The child not only gets dressed, but associates the experience with care and trust. The immediate outcome may look the same: a dressed child. But the emotional legacy is completely different. Being the silent teacher does not mean never getting irritated or never failing. It means understanding that every reaction is a seed planted. Some seeds sprout in days, others in years, but all of them grow. Patience is planting without demanding an immediate harvest. It is trusting that, even if it seems pointless now, your quiet example will become the foundation of your child's adult life. Seneca said, "Time discovers truth. Time also reveals the impact of patience. Perhaps your child won't thank you today. Perhaps tomorrow they will still push back. But in the future they will remember, my father didn't give up on me. My mother didn't lose her calm with me. They were a steady presence, even when I was a storm." That is the legacy that outlives words, books, and speeches. The living example of patience. We've reached the end of this journey of reflection. But the real walk begins now, inside each home, in every quiet gesture, in every moment when patience is tested. Stoicism has taught us that patience is not weakness but strength, that to endure is not to surrender, but to remain firm, that we do not control what happens, but we can always choose how to respond. Jung has reminded us that parenting is not only about raising children, but also about confronting our own shadows. Our children reveal in us hidden fears, frustrations, and expectations. By recognizing them, we stop projecting onto our kids and begin guiding them with greater awareness. Buddhism, in turn, has shown us that compassion is presence. It is standing by the child, not to force them into a mold, but to accompany them on their unique path. It is accepting that every cry, every silence, every crisis can be an invitation to inner transformation. To parents of autistic and ADHD children, Stoic philosophy offers a calling. See patience not as a burden, but as a spiritual practice. Every crisis is training. Every challenge is a teacher in disguise. Every day lived with patience lays another brick in the fortress of the soul, because in the end, what your children need most is not perfect parents, but steady guides. Not long speeches, but quiet examples. Not haste, but presence. Seneca said, "Patience is the fortress of the soul." Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "The obstacle is the way." Epictetus taught, "Some things are up to us, others are not." These lines are not mere ancient maxims. They can become compasses for your daily life. So the great question is, are you willing to turn each difficulty into training in patience? Are you ready to be the wise guide your child needs, not the controller the world demands? Will you choose to react like the chaos or respond like the calm? Patience does not change the world in an instant, but it changes you. And when you change, the world around your child changes too. That is the true legacy, the strong silence of a father, the unshakable calm of a mother, the presence of someone who chooses to love with firmness every day. The obstacle is not the end. The obstacle is the way. Now I ask you, what was the most recent obstacle that tested your patience? And how could you turn it into a path for growth? Share your reflection in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend. Your experience can inspire other parents to find strength in patience.